Welcome. We're so glad you've joined us this morning for creating a realistic and challenging facility exercise around an evacuation shelter. It's presented today by Jonathan Nixarian. Jonathan Nixarian, known as Nick, works as an emergency preparedness specialist at Savannah River Site. He's been working in the DOE complex for over 6 years in construction, security, and emergency preparation. He has a BS in Homeland Security, a master's in emergency management, and a PhD in public policy administration and Homeland Security. So great. We are having some technical trouble with the identified chat. Sorry about that. So questions are not really coming in on the chat, but they could be addressed later. Jonathan's contact information is in the speaker tab, so please feel free to send him an email later. We will have a couple of questions after the presentation, though. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Nixarian. Nick, the virtual stage is now yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Nixarian, and I'll be presenting Creating a Realistic and Challenging Facility Exercise around an Evacuation Shelter. In May of 2019, a mobile above-ground tornado and hurricane shelter was installed in solid waste management facility at Savannah River Site. The design features is approximately 130,000 pounds, does not require tie downs or anchors, able to withstand 300 mile an hour winds, 150 mile an hour missile impact, and is designed with the capability to withstand an EF5 tornado or Cat 5 hurricane. Additionally, it is OSHA compliant, handicap accessible, FEMA 320, 361 design compliant, heavy impact certified, blast tested, workplace violence secure, hydrostatic pressure tested, and again, does not require anchors or tie downs. Design capabilities is solar power light for approximately 16 hours battery life, 5 roof-mounted heat and air conditioning units that are 13,500 BTU and are designed to be removed in case of access to the shelter should needs arise. Restroom, which is handicap accessible, and it's hardwired power, public address, phone, and television. 130 people maximum, 2 entry points capable of being locked from the inside, and the doors statically have an admin security seal for ease of access should the need arise. Upon arrival, there was initial opinions from personnel on site of skepticism. Concerns were raised about the feasibility of spending prolonged times within the shelter. Claustrophobia was mentioned, as other claustrophobic employees could create panic or cause concerns. Additionally, concerns were mentioned in regards to change in employee behavior. This is the layout of solid waste management facility. Savannah Riverside is approximately a circular tract of 310 square miles in southwestern South Carolina along the Savannah River, which forms the state line with Georgia. Savannah Riverside includes portions of Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties in South Carolina. E-area itself, or solid waste management facility, is located close to the very center of the site and encompasses close to 300 acres, of which 81 acres is in active use. As such, navigating around the facility requires circular routes, going around burial grounds or structures. On April 13th of 2020, the National Weather Service reported 8 confirmed tornadoes for the central South Carolina and east central Georgia area. Of those, 2 EF3 tornadoes formed on Savannah River Site during the early morning, approximately at 5:15 and 5:30 a.m. The first tornado was 800 yards wide and 38.28 miles in length with winds of 140 miles an hour. The second tornado was 50 yards wide, 8.5 miles in length with winds of 138 miles per hour. This is some of the damage that was on site. So with the arrival of the new structure, interest in incorporating it within the confines of the annual exercise had a strong interest from subject matter experts and facility management. As part of this, an operational drill was developed to ensure personnel were familiar with being inside the structure, reporting to the structure. Because prior to the installation of the structure, proper evacuation shelters were a significant distance away from the area that require personnel to travel via vehicle to reach them in a timely manner, or in worst case scenario, resort to best available refuge areas such as a ditch in the most extreme of cases. This structure provided an opportunity to develop a scenario surrounding a realistic event. As many facilities have EPHAs that require unusual events to trigger them, riders under these circumstances must push the limits of the reality to reach these catastrophes. Every car crash results in a fire, brand new vehicles develop electrical shorts, and lift truck operators with 20 years of experience suddenly make mistakes that a day one trainee knows to avoid. As such, the shelter provided the opportunity to engage in the development of a scenario that involved its use, a tornado, and appropriate response. Leveraging the installation of the new shelter, it was determined that a tornado that necessitated that facility personnel evacuate to the shelter would be utilized. There was discussions and concerns that per procedure, employees were still permitted to vacate the facility to go to the previously established shelter locations. This is an additional challenge as managing people entering and exiting the area during the course of drill play could cause confusion. The solution was to pair facility personnel as controllers with the protective forces personnel to roadblocks to enable facility personnel to re-enter the exercise area. As personnel and some members of management had raised concerns over personnel panicking in a confined space, the determination was made to have a facility employee panic and go to a catatonic state. It was discussed that someone locking up in a state of panic would be realistic enough and address any concerns that were raised that if someone actually had a panic attack tied to claustrophobia, that it could trigger others to panic, and this would not be a good idea. To trigger the EAL, we stipulated that the high winds of the tornado threw drums outside of a storage facility whose doors are left open on either side, and that facility search teams would come across this as part of their assessment. Prior to the drill, pre-existing conditions were set as a severe weather warning had been issued by the National Weather Service, and a tornado watch had been issued by the National Weather Service for SRS region. The initiated incident was the emergency duty officer initiates a call to all control rooms in the area that there's a tornado within the boundaries of the Savannah Riverside. Appropriate response personnel would be to issue a public address announcement and take shelter in appropriate pre-approved locations. Following successful arrival at shelter locations, all clear was simulated issued to the shift operations manager from the emergency duty officer, and personnel were released from the shelter. Shift operations manager received the all clear and allowed the personnel to exit. As personnel were exiting the shelter, the unresponsive employee was noted. The shift operations manager was notified, who requested the first aid team and requested the emergency duty officer to dispatch fire department for assistance. Fire department arrived, aided the first aid team in treating the unresponsive employee, loaded them on the ambulance, and departed out of the area. As this ended up being an X factor, as this was an exercise and players were not briefed, the fire department believed that this was the extent of their play in the exercise. They departed the exercise area and returned to service, which proved troublesome later. Concurrently to this, the shift operations manager briefed assessment teams and dispatched them throughout the facility. These 3 assessment teams, equipped with radios, informed to look out for damaged buildings, debris, downed power cables, and any additional hazards, made their way throughout the facility. As discussed earlier, the size of the facility and the path taken by the assessment teams, it took approximately 1 hour for them to arrive at the incident scene and report it. The leader of the assessment team that discovered and overturned and damaged drums reported their findings and assumed the role of the incident scene coordinator. Upon notification, the shift operations manager made necessary notifications to the facility management, emergency duty officer, and facility personnel by issuing a protective action of remain indoors. This was initially confusing as personnel were slowly trickling back to their workspaces, having just been released from the shelter, and response to this was slow, if not hesitant. Shift operations manager properly categorized and classified the event. The EDO dispatched the fire department and activated the technical support room. The fire department arrived, coordinated with the incident scene coordinator, assumed the role of the incident command, and successfully mitigated the event. The technical support room developed a recovery plan, and exercise was terminated. As mentioned earlier, the fire department was under the impression that the portion of field play was complete. As such, the second deployment created confusion and hindered response. Additionally, the second set of protective actions left many players confused as they had just done a shelter evacuation and then transitioning to remain indoors when they were in the process of traversing the site. Ultimately, we learned that uh, multiple deployments, multiple protective actions are confusing, and since then we've incorporated them into more than just annual exercise and facility operational drills and emergency preparedness drills. Any questions?
Nick, thank you so much for that very interesting presentation. Once again, we're very sorry that the Identify app is not working in the chat. Remember that you can send a question to Nick by looking up his information on the speakers tab, and you can send a question to him then, and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to you. But we do have a couple of questions. Nick, during your presentation, you mentioned the concern about people leaving the area during the exercise. Is it typical for people to be able to leave the exercise area?
Carol, no. Generally, we plan to build roadblocks or personnel blocks to prevent people from leaving the exercise area during the time of play. However, as one of the authorized shelters for solid waste management facility is a structure outside of their area, um, and it's still to this day still a allowable option, we had to account for that. And more importantly, once they had gone and the all clear is given, we need them to be able to come back. So in some cases, they might be key players as part of the ERO.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I bet people sometimes want to take the opportunity to go home, right?
Absolutely.
Nick, is there anything else you think of you might want to elaborate on since we have a couple of minutes, perhaps, about the responses you had with the firefighters?
Yeah. So generally, all scenarios being in a box, response is response. Um, with the nature of the exercise, and we don't brief players on what to expect. The fire department previous to this was very used to a single focused response, and so when they came in to respond to a first aid situation, they didn't anticipate having to come back, and it was, like I said, over an hour between dispatches, and so it kind of caught uh, them off guard. I mean, they responded perfectly fine. It was just they had, you know, almost stood down their the fire team that was anticipated to support the exercise at that time. Um, Going forward, we have liaisons within the fire department for training that probably need to get, or not probably, but that we do coordinate a little bit better with. This is a lesson learned.
So great. Everyone plays such an important part.
Absolutely.
If you don't have anything else, this will conclude our session. And reminder to everyone, this presentation, Creating a Realistic and Challenging Facility Exercise Around an Evacuation Shelter, has been recorded, and it'll be available for playback at your convenience. Please remember to complete the survey. That confirms your attendance, and it helps us. We look forward to seeing you at our next session on this channel by Paula Gray and Adam Casey, entitled Emergency Preparedness Drills During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We're certainly hoping we can get our chat up and working, but join us nevertheless. And don't forget, at 4 o'clock, our social will be a scavenger hunt. So don't miss that. See ya.